Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Policy and Overview Board, the first meeting of 2024. Apologies for absence we have at the moment, I believe.
Just Councillor Seusless,
who's unwell this evening, unfortunately. Welcome to 145 King Street. It's the first meeting of any of the council committees that has been held here. So please bear with us if things are a little bit rough and ready this evening. We have done our best to prepare, but we've already had some difficulties, I think, with the print Wi-Fi or something like that. So welcome to the meeting. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be live streamed on the council's YouTube channel this evening. So by participating in the meeting, you are agreeing to that. Should there be a fire alarm, the fire exit is on my right and officers will guide us in the correct direction. We're not expecting any tests this evening, as far as I'm aware. And just another bit of housekeeping, because we're unfamiliar with the building, the toilets are on my left. Before I go on to the full agenda, could I just ask officers or remind officers, when you are introducing a report or speaking, could you please introduce yourself with your name and what your position is, so that we know who is presenting to us. So, sorry, I just need to check. Okay, we already have a technical hitch, it would appear. So if I could move on to the next item, which is declarations of interest. Are there any councillors here this evening that have got any declarations of interest that relate to any items on the agenda? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting. They are on page 4 to 19. Are there any issues of accuracy that anybody would like to raise from the previous minutes? No. Okay, and those minutes are agreed, yes? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that brings us on to our first substantive item this evening. We're at the time of year where the council is setting its budget. We on this Policy and Oversight Board have a responsibility to have a look at the corporate budget and the budget across the board strategically. So I would like to invite, first of all, the Cabinet Member for Finance, Councillor Rowan Ree, to give us a short introduction to this year's budget paper that we have before us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, committee members. It's good to be back again at this time of year to go through the budget, and I'm looking forward to spending the next few weeks going through this with all of you in the various packs. It's a really good opportunity to scrutinise the details of the budget and to delve into the nitty-gritty of how it's all put together. So I'm looking forward to sharing more of that with you over this evening and over the coming weeks. I'd also like to thank the council officers who've done such a good job in putting this budget together. We've got some of my colleagues from the finance team and the corporate services team here this evening, and they've done a truly excellent job in making sure that we have a balanced budget that really puts the needs of our residents first. But I'd also like to thank officers from across the council in all the departments who've made sure that we're operating the most efficient way possible, that we're funding all the services that residents need, and that we're managing the council in the way that it should be managed, and managing the public's money in the way that it should be managed. So just to set the scene a little, I think anyone who's opened a newspaper or turned on the news in the last few months will have seen that this is a difficult time for local government finance. We've seen councils like Woking, like Birmingham, like Nottingham having to issue Section 114 notices, effectively saying that they're not able to meet their financial obligations. This is something that's becoming more and more of a problem. 1 in 5 councils now say they're at serious risk of having to issue a Section 114 notice in the coming year. There's a real crisis in local government finance. I know that you will have residents coming to you who are perhaps concerned about the state of council's finances. Perhaps they rely on council services and they want to be reassured that they're going to be there and that they're going to be provided. So I wanted to take this opportunity to provide that reassurance to the public. Hammersmith and Fulham is a well-run council. The auditor came and spoke to us at the audit committee a couple of months ago. He said we're one of the best-run councils in London. We've managed to put together a balanced budget this year. Last year, we ran a budget surplus. We actually managed to contribute money to our reserves at a time when most councils are taking money out. So residents should be reassured that their services are being well managed, they're being well looked after, and they're being well funded. But it's only possible to do that because we have this approach of ruthless financial efficiency, this process of continuously reforming the way that we operate as a council. I always say that I don't want us to look like a well-run council. I want us to look like a well-run organisation, taking the best bits of the private sector, the best bits of the third sector, the best bits of the public sector, whether that's the culture of a startup, whether it's the efficiency of a large tech firm using data to provide the best services to its customers. We should be looking to take all these examples so that we can run in the most effective way possible. And that's where I think the second part of my job title, the reform element of my role, becomes even more important. This budget puts in train a number of reforms, whether that's in terms of technology that we're using, whether it's in terms of organizational reforms, and then also some of the policy reforms that we're funding through the budget. So if I can touch on all those points briefly, in terms of technology, it's incumbent on all organizations to make sure that they're being run in the most effective, efficient way. And technology is changing the way that organizations operate, whether that's using AI in our social care service to make sure that we're getting all of our equipment returns when we need it, whether that's robotic processing being used in our revenues and benefits team to make sure that people are getting the benefits they need and that we're collecting all of the council tax revenue that we should be. We're making the most of this new technology, and we're going to make sure that we remain at the cutting edge of that and are really pioneering this in terms of local government. In terms of the organisational reforms, we have 4 big cross-council projects that are being started as part of this budget. We're going to be looking at property, commercialisation, staffing, and then the way that we use data. Through all of these, we're hoping that we can find efficiencies in how the council spends its money, how the council operates, and that will help us to cut spending in the future and to protect the frontline services that people rely on so much. Finally, in terms of the reforms in policy that we're progressing through this budget, a great example of this is the family hubs. The idea of taking council services out into the community, giving people a one-stop shop to come and access, whether it's children's services, adult social care, housing services. This is going to change the way that local residents interact with the council for the better. Now, I'm going to hand over to the council officers who are going to be able to talk through the details of the budget, and I look forward to answering your questions after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ree. Mr. Kelsey, would you like to present your report?
Good evening. Thank you, Councillor Hoban. I'm Sukhvinder Kelsey, and I'm the Strategic Director of Finance here at LBHF. I've been in post for about 20 months or so now. This is my second meeting this evening at POB to talk about the budget overall for you. So Councillor Ree has explained the context of the budget and the overall position. There is a detailed report that's been sent out to all of you, and there are some appendices that give you some supplementary information on the overall savings proposals, the trends over the past few years, and some other information on grants. But I've got a very short presentation, Chair, no more than 10 to 15 minutes or so, that hopefully draws out some of those key themes that are in the budget there. And then afterwards, obviously, any questions and any details that you want to. I'm hoping that David will do his magic and share the screen, and he does so right on cue. So thank you very much for that. So what I'd really like to go through this evening then is just a few matters with you. I want to first of all touch base on the strategic operating environment that we find ourselves with. David, if you just move that one, please. Thank you. In terms of our operating environment, I want to say something about our objectives or our financial plans that Councillor Ria has indicated, and our delivery strategy over the past few years, how the council has been successful in balancing its books and managing resources very well and looking after the finances for the residents of the borough. Say a little bit about the proposed budget for 24-25, some of the assumptions that underpin it, and some of the outcomes from those budget proposals. And then finally, to conclude, to say a little bit about our medium-term position overall and a couple of words about the reserves position. So very briefly then, to just touch base on the strategic operating environment, members of the board, you'll be very familiar with some of those themes in there, but I think it's always worth recapping on some of those. So I'll just spend a few moments to go through those. It won't have escaped us all that the economy is going through some significant turbulence overall. We've seen inflation at some of the highest levels for many a year, several decades, and interest rates have been at the highest for at least 10, 15 years. So at the moment, inflation is about 4%. It increased in December. It was at much higher levels before that, 10% or so a year ago. Interest rates are over 5% now. We've seen about 13 or 14 increases in each month. Now, the implications for those are it's putting pressure on our costs, on our contractors who deliver services. They're struggling to meet all the obligations that they've got to do. The interest rates are causing pressure on our borrowing. It means that some of our regeneration programs need to be reevaluated to make sure that they continue to be affordable. The economy generally is not in a good place, is my assessment. The Chancellor, when he spoke on the 22nd of November, talked about a general economic stagnation, really, not a significant amount of growth overall expected. Unemployment is about 4% in total, and it will remain at that level. And really, household incomes are not going to be increasing substantially over the next few years. All that is putting pressure on the services that we as a council provide to our residents, whether you see it in children's services, adult services, temporary accommodation, and all the other vital services that the council provides overall. On top of that, we've got some significant legislative burdens. I've just mentioned a couple there: Environment Act, Social Regulation Act. I won't go through the detail for those there. Increasing regulation from national government. We've got Ombudsman, Oflog, which we just set up over the summer. They are putting more and more obligations on councils to report matters, and we already do that in a very transparent way, is my opinion, in any case. Then there continue to be uncertainty over the reforms of local government finance. The government continues with an annual settlement. It has promised for many years that it will try to do a multi-year settlement, but we're just seeing those annual settlements as they are. A number of reforms, like the social care reforms, fair funding reforms, have really been deferred for a while. So we're not going to see any changes there in the near future. Some business rates have been localized, but it's not a full devolution scheme that was intended to be operated. So that makes it very difficult for us to try to plan in a very robust, strong way for the future. And as a council, we've got some major projects that we do need to just make sure now we complete Civic Campus, Hammersmith Bridge, and all our housing development programs. They're big programs that we just need to make sure we progress those. So moving on to the objectives of our financial plans, in setting those out for the medium term, what we've tried to do is to make sure that we're underpinning those with some key principles. Now, the values that are on there, if you're able to move that, David, please, do reflect the values and the 6 values that the council has set out. I've just said them in a slightly different way here. And just to say a couple of things about those, we obviously want to make sure that we're protecting our statutory services, those that are valued and welcomed by residents. We want to make sure that they are continue to be provided. Of course, the other point is to make sure that all our residents, businesses, and visitors to the borough get those services that they do value and they want to receive. The council provides an extensive range of services, from education, planning, housing, to all the things that you know of. The aspect of safety is very important to our residents and our business and our visitors. The council continues to invest in community safety, our CCTV programs, the let enforcement team that the council established a couple of years or so ago, all helping to improve the kind of safety of our environment overall. It's very important that the prosperity of the borough continues to be strong. So the council is working very well with all the industrial sectors, the industrial strategy, the STEAM strategy that we developed. That is increasing the growth of businesses in the borough, increasing the prosperity of those businesses and our residents overall. Councillor Rias talked much more eloquently than me about need to be an agile, modern and innovative council. So we'll carry on to progress those matters too. And underpinning all of these, we must make sure that we continue to be a resilient council financially, and that our resources are well managed under the ruthless financial agenda that we've got. So there are some of the objectives that we've put in place for our kind of financial planning. And I've always reflected really in my short period here as to how the council has been able to deliver those priorities. And of course, the secrets were revealed to me when I looked at some of the numbers. And on the next slide, I want to just touch on some of those. The council has been really, really efficient in how it's used and spent its resources. Since 2014-15, we've delivered, or the council has delivered, I can't give any credit for that, you can, £118 million across all services, how we've procured those services, how we've worked with the private sector, how we've effectively reduced our overheads, rationalised all the things that we use to deliver our services overall. The council is working very efficiently and well with our developer communities. We are generating significant resources from SIL and Section 106. We've got about 100 million at the moment, and last November, the council received, or cabinet received, a report that showed how about 19 million of that was being spent during the previous financial year. We continue to make sure that a number of our services that we deliver that are chargeable, that are recovering their full costs. So they are almost net neutral to the council and not incurring an extra cost to the general fund overall. We generate over £60 million a year annually from those fees and charges overall. I think we continue to work well as we can to secure resources from national programmes, whether it's the Green Carbon Agenda, it's other resources that are available to the council. We're bidding for those, community safety resources, GLA, and all those other resources available to the council. So we're trying to exploit and making sure that we maximise that position overall. We do work collaboratively across the public sector with the National Health Service, the police, other local authorities, wider councils, to try to make sure that we work together to maximise commissioning opportunities, investment opportunities, and those other things that help our residents overall. Modern IT systems, Councillor Ria has talked much more efficiently about those than I can, but they are important in the delivery of services. All businesses need to have efficient systems. That's how they're all working these days. And particularly how we use the information that we've got. The council has got quite a bit of extensive information, and we just make that used effectively so that it helps with the delivery of our services that we do so. So in terms of saying a little bit about some of the assumptions that we put into the budget for 24-25, we've gone for provisions for 3% for pay and inflation 5% across our contracts. Inflation at the moment is 4% overall. I'm hoping that these are reasonable estimates, and I'm sure that they'll be there or thereabouts for that. But we've got some contingencies and some reserves if we need to do that. We're going to invest significantly in the delivery of the council's priorities. £10.7 million overall we'll set aside for that, and I'll say a few words about that in a moment. The government, in its assumptions over the long term, is assuming that local authorities in their grant settlements will be required to increase council tax by 4.99% over the next 5 years or so. So our budget proposals look at that. But can I just say that from all our research that we've done, practically the entire nation, all local authorities are going with that overall number. I think local authorities' finances are in a difficult position that Councillor Ree has articulated earlier, and local authorities have had very little ability to do anything but that. The National Revenue Grant settlement overall, well, there was a settlement for that which assumed about 6.7% or so in total, but that assumed out of that amount we would be raising the council tax by the 4.99% overall. The borough is prospering and growing, so we're seeing a little bit of growth in properties. probably on average about 1,000 properties a year, new build and all the things that the borough is doing. So that generates obviously some extra council tax revenues for us, but it does mean there are more pressures on our services that we need to deliver. And we're maintaining and retaining some of our contingencies to ensure that we've got a strong resilience overall. And any planned borrowing that we're undertaking to fund our capital program is fully funded. So the council has not undertaken any new borrowing since 2020. Okay. And it's relied on its internal resources, but we will need to do that in the medium term in the next 2 to 3 years as some of our big programs come to completion, particularly on the housing side, which I think the scrutiny committee next week will look at in more detail or the week after. So just to say a little bit about the council tax position overall. So Councillor Rhea has explained earlier some of the positions. The council has one of the lowest council tax bandees nationally, third lowest overall, £871 what it was in 2023-24. And just to give an indication of 1% means for that, £8.70 is every percent is the kind of ask of residents. But that is something that not all residents within the borough will have to make a contribution to. So I've given some information there about the total number of dwellings that we've got, and out of that total, only 58% of our residents will be expected to pay that in full. We've got 4% of residents who will be exempt, students, care leavers, some of the vacant properties that we've got. 11% will be fully protected to the council tax support scheme. That's about 10,000 households across the borough. And 27%, about 25,000 residents in total, will receive a discount of at least 25% on the council tax. So hopefully that gives you an indication, members of the board, about the implications and the concerns that residents may have on that. Just to move on and explain some of the key changes on the budget overall. This is a summary that really tries to say to you the key changes in the budget overall. And I've deliberately kept it at a very high level just to draw out some of the key themes. So we balance the budget for 23-24. The pay and price inflation is going to lead to about £14 million more, 13.7. That's the 3% and the 5% that I was mentioning earlier. We're going to put 10.7 million of additional investment in services to protect the priorities that the council has identified and wants to deliver for residents, visitors and businesses overall. We continue to be efficient in how we deliver our services, and there are proposals of 8.1 to deal with that, mainly to do with commissioning and how we work with the private sector. So I'll say a couple of words about that in a moment. We've taken a very considered view about all our other costs overall, interest, grant settlements, concessionary fares, which is a scheme operated across London. That's going to bring us about 12.3 million in total. And then the council tax requirement of 4. That will then allow us to balance the overall budget for 24-25 in the way that the slide there articulates. So just to say a couple of words about the savings, perhaps do that first before we go on to the investment overall. I've provided a very high level summary here of the kind of key service areas and where they are, and an indication of what the themes are within those services. I'm not proposing to go through that in full because the appendices attached to the report provide a full detail of those. Just to go on to the growth bit for a moment then, 10.7 million, the investment overall within the services. One of the things that we want to absolutely do is to protect the home care services that we provide to our residents. So an extra 4.2 million will go into that service there following that procurement that was completed over the summer. London Living Wage being paid, extra quality being provided to residents, and maintaining a priority overall for the council. We're also setting aside 0.6 million for transition services from children's to adulthood. Very important to make sure that that pathway is clearly spelled out. We probably will need to invest a bit more resources in that for the future, but for now, that'll be something that we can start with to just move that forward overall. Homelessness is a real pressure across London authorities. I'm always staggered when I hear the facts about that. There are, as I understand it, 179,000 people homeless in London, across Greater London. That's almost the same as the entire population of the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. It's a staggering number, and the amount we spend nationally on homelessness exceeding 20 billion a year is really a huge number. That's 20 billion compared to the 64 that we spend across all local authority services overall. In my view, a bit of investment in social housing and affordable housing will be more efficient. So we spend on average about £7,000 a year to house somebody in a social home, 20,000 in temporary accommodation, and those costs will only increase. And we know there'll be a bit of extra pressure on the council for that. Children's school transport services, very, very important. Our children deserve to get the transport to school that they need. We already spend about 5 million to that, so that will go up to about 6.5 million next year. It'll provide transport to 550 children to the schools that they want to go to in a safe way and looking after their well-being overall. We are going to be investing some resources in housing services, about 1.7. The housing service has got some pressures in terms of all the things that it does on the council housing side, the pressures on the inspections, the repairs and so on. So there are some costs that get recharged into the HRA from the general fund. We're just realigning those and adjusting those. And I'm comfortable that that's the right investment to go in there. That will ensure the long-term resilience of the HRA too. Family hubs, a bit of investment, 300,000. That's on the back of some investment that we've done in previous years to allow that program to continue to be embedded and increased overall. It's a great way for the council to coordinate and provide services overall. And I've summarised in the last one a catch-all really. There are a few things with that one. Cybersecurity is major within there. Some investment in our waste services, particularly the rollout for the provisional services on the wheel bin services. So some of those costs and investments are in there. And we also want to make sure we complete some of our major projects. So overall, 10.7 million of investment that will go on to protect those services that are valued and appreciated by our residents, visitors and businesses. Just a couple more slides and I'm almost at the end of the kind of introduction. I just wanted to say something about the reserves position overall. Very important that the council maintains a good level of reserves overall in these very difficult times. And I'm pleased to say that the council has done that admirably over the years, as Councillor Ree has indicated earlier. Our levels are comparable to London authorities, probably be slightly better than those because a number of London boroughs will have to dip into those in the current year. And there are minimum balances that we absolutely maintain of somewhere between 19 and 25. That's the range that we've advised. 22 odd million is what we've got at the moment. And that's something that is there as unfettered resources. We've got other resources that are earmarked for particular things and so on. Okay. And we're only using some small amounts of resources to deal with some particular projects. We've got a 3-year IT refreshment program that we do to replace all our laptops, so we'll do that. And then just finally, to say a little bit about the medium-term outlook, I'm sad to say really that I can't see our operating environment getting better anytime soon over the next 12 to 18 months. So it will continue to be difficult. I'm really hoping that inflation will start to come down and that interest rates will start to reduce as well. The pressure on family incomes will reduce and obviously unemployment and so on will fall to reduce pressure on our services. But it's something we'll just have to keep a lookout for. I can't see any changes in the national regulations. That will continue to increase. We will still see more of that, more inspections on our services, and the demographic pressures will still be there. Lots of local authorities nationally are seeing pressures in temporary accommodation, which is homelessness, which we talked about earlier, but adult social care services, children's services, and other services overall. But they are the 3 big ones. And unfortunately, our forecast gap for the next 3 years is at least £10 million or so per annum. That's likely to increase as we review that position. So I wish I was coming here to say to you that, we really sorted out all those issues, but I think they will continue for a little while longer yet on that one. And then finally, just to say that what we're now doing is, so tonight we're obviously consulting you with the proposals on the budget here. The PAC committees will be meeting next week and the first week in February to go through all the detailed proposals. And then obviously you know that much better than I do, Cabinet on the 12th, and then we'll have full council on the 28th to go through the budget overall. Chair, with that, I'm happy to pause. I'm sorry if I took slightly longer than the 10-15 minutes I wanted.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go over to members of the committee for any questions. I've got a few questions and comments that I'll get to if nobody else picks them up. Does anybody want to kick off? Councillor Rowbottom.
Thank you very much, and well done again increasingly insurmountably hard climate to produce a budget like this. And Sukhvinder, I note the kind of 13.7 million more through paying price increases, and of course that you're producing a budget kind of inflation unexpectedly going up by 0.4%. So I wondered what the kind of risks are with the almost completed budget by the time it was announced. And imagine, is there modelling, basically how great is the risk of that December increase that was unexpected, to whoever would like to respond? Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else want to ask a question, and then we'll Councillor Brockle-Bankfowler.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm interested and just want some reassurance. You mentioned the reserves. How much of the earmarked reserves are effectively supporting the revenue budgets at the moment?
Councillor Perez, and then we'll have some answers. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and to echo Councillor Robert, and thank you very much to you and the officers and Councillor Reid for balancing the budget and the proposal for the year ahead. I've got a question in relation to the household support fund. I know that the autumn statement said that it wouldn't continue beyond I think the 31st of January this year, March this year. So what impact will that have, and has there been any announcement in terms of any replacement funding, or will there be a financial burden as well for the council? Thank you.
Councillor Reid, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for those questions. Yeah, if I start with inflation, it does make setting a budget very hard. You know, we had double-digit inflation not very long ago. The fact that the government's been unable to control inflation makes it incredibly difficult to budget, particularly when you're looking at the sort of medium-term 4 years that we're looking at here. The way that we've had to mitigate that risk is to try and build contingencies into the budget. So we, as Sukhvinder says, we've budgeted 3% for pay inflation, 5% for prices inflation. We're currently at 4%, but that figure, yeah, as we saw at the start of the month, can go up as well as down. We think that we've put sufficient contingency into the budget. We think that the inflation and the policy contingencies should be sufficient to cover that. But you're absolutely right to point out that inflation being out of control does make it an awful lot harder to set a budget. In terms of the reserves, I think it's important to take a step back and consider what it is reserves are for. There's firstly the sort of rainy day fund element of reserves. You know, they're there in case something unexpected happens or you need to dip into them. But also they're there to smooth out spending over a longer period. The fact that we plan budgets for 4 years in advance means that we can anticipate expensive big items of spending that will have to come in future years. And so we can set aside money for that in the run-up, so that we have a pot there to borrow from. So that's where the earmarked reserves come in. You know, where we know that we're going to have to undertake spending in the future, we'll put it aside, and that goes into the earmarked reserves. The general balances are more of the rainy day fund. As I say, we were able to top up the general balances last year because we came in under our budgets, because across the council departments and budgets are being so well managed, and we take this ruthless financial efficiency approach to budgeting. Finally, the housing support funds. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is very much the chaotic way that the government deals with local council finances, right? We found out in the autumn statement that this money is just no longer going to be available at the end of this financial year. We spend £2.8 million from the household support fund on cost of living measures that residents, you know, rely on. But it's vital funding that supports a lot of good programs across the borough. And so now, with that money being sort of pulled out from underneath us at such short notice, we're going to have to reevaluate how it is we provide these services. We have been told that, you know, potentially it may be that some additional money might be in the budget, but we're not going to have a budget until the 8th of March. Right? Going back to the point about inflation, it makes it almost impossible for local councils to plan for spending like this when you have such a haphazard, chaotic funding approach from central government.
Mr. Kelsey, is there anything you'd like to add?
Chair.
Okay, I just like to pick up on this point about planning. You know, obviously, to an extent, things like what the pay rise might be, and we've got a kind of like, I suppose, a gauge of inflation through a year to give you an idea. But I mean, when we actually know exactly what we're getting from government, it appears to always be pretty late. And I know, I think it was just before Christmas this year. How much does that hinder both the planning for the 1 year ahead, but also the long-term planning that we're trying to do to work out what our budget will be in 3, 4, 5 years' time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hugely detrimental to the process. We found out on the 18th of December what the settlement was going to be. Now, there's no reason at all why central government needs to leave it that late, and it's getting later and later every year. It used to be that we would get these figures in November, but now it's very much sort of the last day the Parliament is sort of sitting before they go off for Christmas. When we start planning the budget, as I say, 4 years in advance, but we're sort of constantly working towards it. We are generally using sort of worst case scenario assumptions. The government manages to meet these worst case scenarios every year, but it would be a heck of a lot easier if we actually got these figures a bit earlier. For instance, for the last 6 years now, we've had a 1 year financial settlement. There's absolutely no reason why the government couldn't give us a longer periods of settlement so that we can plan ahead. It used to be that there would be multi-year financial settlements. Now we find out at the last minute what we're going to get for the 1 year, and then we have to try and guess the rest of it. It's as I say, it's a hugely chaotic system, and it makes it very difficult to plan for these sort of things.
Just a further point on that, grant funding. Obviously, there are grants, pots of money available throughout the year. That sometimes can be quite short notice to spend, and how do we do our best to get the best out of that and integrate it into things that this council is trying to achieve?
Yeah, I'm sure Vindula wants to come in on this one as well, but part of being ruthlessly financially efficient is not just looking after the spending, but also taking care of the revenue as well, and making sure that we're getting hold of as much cash as we're entitled to. So we're very good, I think, at horizon scanning, looking for any pots of money that the council is able to get hold of. We've significantly increased the amount that we get from grants that we have to apply for now, because we take this approach of scanning so widely and making sure that we get everything that we're entitled to. One thing I'd say about sort of central grants, and this is another not particularly good trend that we're seeing in terms of council funding, is that more and more of the money that's allocated to councils from central government is ring-fenced for very specific purposes. It used to be that you would get a grant and councils could choose how to spend that in the way that was most beneficial for them. The problems that we have in Hammersmith and Fulham will be different to the problems that they have in other areas of the country. But now more and more of the grants that we get from central government are tied to specific areas. So that takes away local councils' abilities to decide how to spend their money. I think that's something that we'd ideally like to see reversed, but I'm not sure we're seeing any sign of that at the moment.
Mr. Kelsey.
If I may, Chair, I think this annual settlement, just to add to what Councillor Ria said, for me, the worst aspects of it is it creates a lot of uncertainty for our residents, for our businesses who work with our contractors, visitors to the borough. It means we can't give them a clear guarantee about what levels of resources that are going to be available for the future to deliver services. And that can sometimes lead to local authorities making some knee-jerk reactions and decisions that are not best thought out and best planned. So we do try to plan, as Councillor Ree has indicated, taking the kind of worst scenario that we think will materialise and try our best with that and hope for the best. But it does create all uncertainty, which does lead to all those difficulties and destabilizes our staff too, because they can't be certain about what the council will be planning over the medium term too. It's a difficult environment, but we must try whatever we can to create that certainty in the local government finance settlements.
Okay. Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. So just 2 or 3 points. I was sorry, you might be able to say a bit more about the extra money that's going into supporting the transition from child to adulthood for those who use that service. I think it's extremely important that children that are part of the social care sort of pathway don't have that cliff edge that can come with all the services that providing, whether that be through learning disabilities or elsewhere. Suddenly, at age 18, they're no longer able to access the support that they need, and it clearly needs to stretch into adulthood in many cases, and to give them the opportunities that we can. So very encouraged to see that some extra money has been put into that, and hopefully it's a sort of, I think it notes the learning disabilities transition team, but also the sort of preparing for adulthood team that's been established over the last few years is hopefully going to be able to make use of that. Interested in the brief comments that you've got on that. Couple of things. I was obviously very encouraged to see that we're continuing with the generous council tax support scheme, which was mentioned. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about how that continues to be funded. Clearly, as I think you mentioned earlier on, there was sort of money that came with that 10 or more years ago, but I'm not sure whether that is still the case. So interested in how that still continues to be funded. And sort of finally, as a third point, I think cybersecurity that you mentioned, we're putting some extra money into that, the council. Clearly, that's a growing threat. We've seen all sorts of examples of that in the last 2 or 3 years from sort of national actors in other jurisdictions that cause these problems for public services have been particularly badly affected in some cases. So I wonder if you could explain how you're going to be spending that money to, sort of counter the growing, the ever-increasing threat of cyber attacks that come through all sorts of malicious actors.
Thank you, Councillor Vaughan. Can I just come in on the cybersecurity point? Because I noticed it was sort of bundled together with several other items in terms of an investment area. Officers may well be aware that this committee has done work around digital inclusion, and one of the things that we are planning to look at in the future is AI. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of risks and issues, but there's all sorts of positive side of that as well. We very much want to work with residents in that area. So if you could maybe say a little bit more about what that investment is and how that might be relevant to the items that this committee is looking at, that would be really useful. Thank you. Councillor Reid, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much. Yep. So 3 really important points there. The new investment in transition services. Look, obviously, children that are being looked after by the council's children's services department have a number of needs and receive a number of services. Then they get to this sort of arbitrary point where you pass a certain age, and then all of a sudden you're no longer the concern of the children's services department. You become the concern of the adults services department. Now, it's very easy in situations like that for people to fall through the cracks, or it's very easy for the services to not be joined up. So it's really important that we have an effective transition process so that people go from one to the other, ideally seamlessly, right? It's part of a sort of a wider move of trying to eliminate siloed working across the council. We've seen that with things like the Residents' Experience and Access Programme, where we're trying to sort of pull down these barriers that you get in large organisations where things are organised by departments. It's a large investment in the transition, but overall, it's going to have a huge impact, and it's probably going to end up saving an awful lot of money because you avoid the sort of the errors that come with moving from one system to the other. The council tax support scheme, I'm incredibly proud that we have, I think, the most progressive council tax support scheme in the country. So 42% of residents in Hammersmith and Fulham receive some sort of discount. 11%. The most vulnerable people in our borough pay absolutely nothing at all. We're one of only 36 councils in the country that have no minimum charge on the council tax. And I'm not sure of anywhere that has such a huge section of the population who are covered by the scheme. It is expensive, but then it's worth doing, right? Council tax is a hugely regressive tax. This makes it a bit more progressive. Yeah, it means that those who are least able to pay the least, and that's hugely important. You're right to say that the way that this is being funded has changed. So Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler rightly points out that when the Conservative administration were in charge, they had a similar system. That was a system that was funded entirely by central government. We had a £12 million grant specifically for the purpose of paying for the council tax support scheme. We now don't have that specific benefit. You know, it's been rolled into our general grant and cut by 55% in real terms. You know, we find this money because this is a service that we value, and it's one that I'm very happy to say we're going to be protecting for years to come. Finally, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is, as you say, a growing problem, and really is one of the things that keeps anyone in public services up at night. I think there was an article yesterday in the FT about the British Library and the impact that the cyber attack had on them. I think they said they'd ended up spending 10 times the amount that had been demanded in ransom on trying to reorganize themselves to get back up to speed after the attack. We're very keen that we don't have to spend millions of pounds of taxpayers' money having to rebuild our systems after an attack. And so the best way to stop that is to make sure that the attack doesn't happen in the first place. We know that there was a North London council that was the victim of a cyber attack. And so we're making sure that our defences are as strong as they possibly can be. That's why we're investing another £250,000 this year into cyber defences. The council holds a huge amount of data about residents. The council systems control a number of services that residents receive and a number of services that residents rely on. And so it's really incumbent on us to make sure that those are protected. And we do that by having the most up-to-date operating systems. We do it by having the best cyber defences that we can buy, and that's what this money is going to pay for.
Thank you. Councillor Daly.
I have two questions, if I may. The Local Government Association has been very clear in saying that nationally councils are facing a £4 billion funding gap. You've spoken about a £10 million per annum forecast budget gap in this borough of the next 3 years. Could you tell me, how will the funding gap impact residents, and what are the consequences we need to be aware of? That was one question. And the second question is around the core settlement. So in the core settlement that was published, the government said that they're going to be increasing the revenue support grants in line with inflation. And I wondered what new funding for local services has the government provided for this year?
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
I did. I was just, I think it's extremely shrewd that we've invested in cybersecurity, but it does beg the question, this is an existential question for all public bodies, and what is the government doing to ensure that the public's information is securely governed over and protected? Why is it, in the face of all of these other challenges, for local councils to pick this up?
I think that's a very good question. I think we could always do with greater support in this area, and it seems like central government would be well placed to be able to provide the latest intelligence and more help to local councils. We'd very much welcome that. We take what we can get when it comes to this, but unfortunately, there's not a lot being offered. If I could go back to the question on the budget gap, we actually £10 million a year is an awful lot of money to save, right? We actually started this year's budget with a budget gap of 25 million, which we were able to close. Going forward, it's going to get tougher and tougher, and we're going to be having to find more and more money while providing the services that the residents rely on so much. You say how will the budget gap affect residents? Ideally, not at all. So we've so far managed to strip out £118 million of spending without affecting frontline services. In fact, not only have we protected the frontline services that we have, we've been able to provide a whole host of new ones as well. We've been able to abolish home care charges. We've been able to provide free breakfast for school children across the borough. We've been able to provide the Let team. You know, these things are, most councils aren't doing this. You know, we're able to do this because, firstly, we've got a hugely imaginative agenda that we're pushing to try and make sure that residents have the best services possible from the council, but also because we are taking this ruthless financial efficiency approach to managing the finances to make sure that we have money available for the things that residents really want us to spend it on. I've mentioned a couple of the efficiency measures that we're going to be pushing across the whole council. So things like the review of property, of commercialisation, of staff, and of data. These are big projects that hopefully are going to generate large savings across the council as a whole. So this isn't looking at individual departments. This is looking at how the council operates as a whole. And so there's wider scope there, I think, for savings. I'm certainly hopeful that from that we'll be able to cut an awful lot out of these £10 million budget gaps, but also, as we have done for the last 9 years, we'll continue managing taxpayers' money as efficiently as we possibly can. The revenue support grant, what are we going to do with the revenue support grant that has gone up in line with inflation? I think it's worth saying actually that the revenue support grant hasn't gone up in line with inflation. What's happened is the council's spending power, in theory, should go up by 6.7%, assuming that the council increases council tax by 2.99% and introduces the full 2% social care precept. So 4.99% is an awful lot of 6.7%. Actually, the revenue support grant has gone up by a minuscule amount, far below the rampant inflation that we've seen in previous years. All the money that we get goes towards the overall pie that we're trying to carve up as effectively as possible. But I think we could all do with a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's kind of no new funding for local services from central government.
So not in line with inflation. It's far below inflation, right? So there is an increase of, let's say 1.7%, which doesn't go very far when you're looking at inflation of 6.7%.
Councillor Perez.
Thank you, Chair. Did you say that we managed to secure 100 million from Section 106 and SIL? And the money that we secured, is that allocated to specific services, or does that go to a central pot and then distributed later? How does it work? Thank you.
Okay. So the council has generated much more than that number over the years, but that's the current balance that we've got at the moment. So there are some specific conditions sometimes that are attached with those resources. We have to spend them in a particular way or in a particular area. So the council will allocate those resources to deliver those priorities. So the best reference that I can probably indicate to members is the report that Councillor Jones took to Cabinet in November that articulated the 18-odd million pounds that the council spent in 22-23 across a whole range of local programmes, investment in local services for residents, the things that they wanted overall within there. Parks, all our highways, traffic, and all those arrangements were all articulated in there. And we want to continue to make sure that that number is maintained. If I may, while I'm just seeing a couple of comments, Councillor Daly, you asked about new grants. There have been no new grants announced and no new funding streams. In fact, we talked earlier about the one that the Household Support Fund is in doubt in any case, and that was one of the new ones that was introduced a couple of years ago. The other arrangements have been really about grants to sustain the social care market, but they're not new either. They've just been now maintained and probably will reduce over the next few years.
Any other questions from committee members? No? Just a couple of observations. We talked quite a lot about sort of property. Obviously, one of the reasons we're here is because we've been more economical with our property. And I think that the innovations that we're looking at, obviously, sometimes it gets preempted by events. So, for example, COVID, working from home, and the realization that we don't need as much office space. Sometimes those events can actually trigger, good forward thinking in terms of reform. So I just wanted to say, I've noted that's why we're here tonight, because we've moved out early because we don't need so much office space. And I'm looking forward to other reforms like that coming forward. I think the different packs will be looking at the granular detail. So we talked a bit about housing and homelessness, etc. And I know that's a massive issue for all London boroughs and a really massive issue here. So the packs will be looking at some of those service details in the budget. But I think overall, it's good to see that we are on top of this and that we are doing our best in what is very, very difficult circumstances. And I think, I want to reiterate what many of the committee members have said and thank Councillor Ree and the officers for actually doing such a good job over the last year or so in terms of putting this budget together, because it doesn't just start now that we're looking at it. It doesn't start when you get the grant settlement just before Christmas or on Christmas Day, as I think somebody joked with me you were going to get at one point. I think that was Mr. Kelsey, yes. It starts now for next year, and the uncertainty that we've got around knowing what our settlement might be makes that all the more challenging. So thank you very much. Right, okay. Yeah. Councillor Brockbank-Fowler, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. The risks listed in the appendixes come with a written explanation, but no figure. Why is that? And can we have the figures, the amounts that are involved?
I mean, a risk is a risk that something might happen. It's not a sort of so you'd want I'm not quite sure what it is you're asking for. A figure for what?
A figure. There's a list of about 5 or 6 items with a written explanation about why it is a risk, but with no figure as to an estimate of how much the risk actually is.
Through you, Chair. As Councillor Ree has indicated, we are looking at all our risks overall the council is facing. Some of those are very, very difficult to quantify because of all sorts of demand issues, unpredictability in the numbers that we've got. But it's just to be aware of those positions overall. And I personally would find it very difficult to put a number to that risk. I could give you a range of what it might be on the best scenario or the worst case scenario. And I don't know how that helps, how much help that would be. But it's something that we just want to make sure that we understand those risks are there and we continue to evaluate them overall to make sure that if we can quantify them, we'll do that and we'll bring them forward in future reports.
Well, thank you for that. I think in the interests of transparency, I was not after a specific figure. Obviously, it's not possible. But a range of a range between the best worst scenario and the worst scenario. That would I think be very helpful to people. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think we've got a little bit more information from Joe McCormack in terms of the sort of service impacts of some of this. So would you like to tell us about that?
Thank you, Chair. So my name is Jo McCormick. I am covering this evening for Nicola, who's the Chief Operating Officer, but who's unfortunately unwell at the moment. And I also have with me my colleague, Alex, in Finance. Between us, we had some points around both finance and corporate services specifically. I'll let Alex begin and follow on from there.
Thank you.
Slides. Okay, so we are going to take you through the Corporate Services Department and the Finance Department budgets for 24-25. If you can move on to the first slide. So starting with the Finance Department, it includes more than just finance, as I'm going to illustrate to you. We've got in here our procurement team, business intelligence team, policy, project management office, the chief exec's office, audit, fraud, risk and insurance. We've also got the budget for our finance and HR system. And we've got an income budget for our digital advertising sites on the general fund. So as back office function, this is mostly staffing. There's 125 budgeted FTEs in here. They make up 78% of that 11.4 million expenditure budget we've got in this department. So finance does make up the largest share of the budget. And the finance team includes both our corporate finance teams and those departmental finance teams that provide dedicated support to each of our council services. Key functions that we've kind of been going through tonight, obviously for the finance function, are establishing our clear medium-term financial strategy, ensuring our council resources are well managed, completing our statutory obligations, the year-end accounts, and ensuring that financial resilience. We've also got the business intelligence team in here. So they're there to help us increase the use of data and analytics to target resources and maximise effectiveness. A big part of that is the council's data warehouse. It's a key part of this strategy. Has over 5 million rows of data, 39 billion cells of data, driving dashboards, statutory returns, automating reporting, and giving service managers the insights they need to make informed decisions. So this is a key part of that digital strategy we've been talking about tonight. As a council, we're an incredibly diverse range of services we provide, and for that reason, we've got over 4,000 different suppliers, around 360 core contracts. So having a specialist procurement function that helps us comply with procurement rules, regulations, and ensuring the economic and social value through the council's commissioning activities is an essential part of our department's service. Got our corporate fraud team as well in here. These support the council in detecting and prosecuting instances of fraud to ensure that the council services are provided to those that need them. In 22-23, they investigated 433 fraud cases, and they'll be working with the business intelligence team over the next year to invest in a fraud hub, bring together data sets from across the council to help us with this task. We've got the policy and project management office in here as well. They help us set our corporate strategy, keep track of the major projects. And one of the key ones that's been mentioned tonight is the cost of living crisis, where they've helped distribute the 2.8 million of funding from Household Support Fund, but also another 1.2 of council funding and public health that's been managed to support the council's most vulnerable residents. Going to move on to corporate services, and Jo.
Thank you. So the Corporate Services Department provides both services to residents directly, but also supports the other departments in providing services to residents too. I'll run through some of the areas we cover. Community engagement and co-production has been at the heart of what we've delivered, and we have a lot of work with our residents directly. Numerous examples this year, but a notable one being our drive around involvement of residents in when we undertake procurement, particularly of our big developments in housing and wider regeneration in the borough. In resident services, we hear directly from residents with 17,000 calls each month and another 1,000 visits to this building, people coming in to talk to us directly face to face. Both Sukvinda and Councillor Reid this evening have already spoken at length about what we've done around our local taxation, with that 42% supported to pay and another 11% not paying anything at all. We are also continue to work with ethical repayment plans where that's appropriate and applicable. We support residents who need it most through the administration of our benefits, but have delivered on some of this work that's been described by Alex on the cost of living, with particular advice and additional funding being administered by the teams in our revenues and benefits services. In registrars this year, we have seen 5,499 new births in the borough and 1,486 new citizenship ceremonies, and we continue our programmes of service improvement with our investment in technology, notably to improve our resident experience and access to our key services. In digital services, Councillor Ree has spoken already this evening about the focus for improvement. We've seen this year achievements in our digitalisation, our automation technologies, and our upgrade and refreshing of our devices that we use to make sure that we can operate with modern agility. We this year completed 323 system changes to make sure that we're working to the best of our ability. Our electoral services and governance functions continue to support our democratic processes, and our legal services ensure we both understand the law but protect our residents too. And finally, our people and talent services support over 2,300 employees with notable achievements this year, including winning our London Regional Winner Award for Large Employer of the Year at the National Apprenticeship Awards, and also being the Large Employer of the Year finalist in the national equivalent of those awards.
Thank you. That was
We've got
quick.
more
You've got
slides.
a bit. We're going to start a bit
Sorry.
more.
This is just going to show you here the budget summary. So this is taking you through a combined look at corporate services and finance, the budget for 24-25. So we've listed out all the services here in defending order of expenditure budget. I should point out here that the resident services budget you've got there includes 9 million of concession repairs, which are payable to TfL. So if you exclude that, we're looking at less than 10% of the council's gross expenditure budget. So that's got the savings, the growth, the inflation all included. If you just move on to the next slide, David. So the savings that we're taking out of corporate finance and finance are just over 500,000, 665,000. 400 of that is in the finance department. We're looking to make a 200k reduction in the budget we hold for our finance and HR system. We're going to save £150,000, we're going to increase our digital advertising income by £150,000, bringing in more money for the council to spend on frontline services. There's 3 general fund sites that we've got, so this is increasing those with inflation and contract negotiation. We then got a £50,000 reduction in our internal audit budget for contracted out days. So this is days we buy in from a private supplier. In corporate services, 265,000 of savings. In digital services, we've already negotiated a new procurement for network and telephony costs. So that's given us a reduction in the budget for that. And there's an SQL migration that's going to involve a reduction in our service licensing and support costs of about 60,000 within that 185. Finally, we've got 80k that we've added to our income budget for our contracted mortuary services. We provide the service in part of a number of boroughs, and we've been able to increase that by inflation, and also budget for an additional service we're providing. So we've already talked tonight about the cybersecurity. So that's the 250,000 investment we're making into corporate services and the digital budget. So that is enhancing that cybersecurity offer. It's giving us an extra money into our out of hours service, and enhancing the license and security that we get from our Microsoft Enterprise agreement. Inflation, we've inflated our staffing budgets for the 23-24 pay awards. So that's held, but the 24-25 that's held in our contingency. So we've provided for that, and we'll allocate that during the year. The contractual budgets and digital services have been increased for the inflation that was mentioned earlier, and we've also increased the inflated the budget for our HR and finance system in line with our projected inflation. Move on to the last slide. So finally, just a few words about the sort of future plans and opportunities in this area. Obviously, we've just mentioned the gap in the next couple of years. So reviewing our medium-term financial strategy, continuing that strong financial governance is obviously a key priority for us, and we're already thinking about the years ahead and setting that budget. Maximising the use of our data and performance management to support frontline services is a key priority for us, and that's going to involve continuing that work on digitalisation, the resident experience and access programme, modernising our delivery systems, and that's on cybersecurity. And Councillor Reid mentioned those 4 programmes that we're working on: the property, commercialisation, workforce, and that digital area. So they're a key part of our medium-term financial strategy going forward. And we've also put in here maximising financial performance of business rates and council tax collection. We've heard what an important part of our revenue that is, and we must make sure we do that as efficiently as possible. Again, some risks here. These affect the whole council, but also do affect corporate services and finance as well. Uncertainty over government funding. We've just talked about the household support fund, and a big amount of that spend is in corporate services. So huge risks we're having to manage there with how we manage that going forward. The continued pressure on public finances. We've talked about inflation, interest rates, etc. Number of contract budgets, especially in digital services there, that present a whole load of risks for us in there. And then household income, specific service pressures on homelessness, adults, children, that we've talked about, which you'll hear far more about in the next few packs. And then finally, that increasing risk on IT systems that we're trying to mitigate as best we can. Continues to present a huge risk for us. I think that was everything we had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. It's all those services that are behind the scenes that make the council work and actually deliver things for our residents that a lot of people out there don't see. So it's absolutely vital, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do an awful lot of things that we do. I've got a question. There was something about digital advertising. Are we confident that we are going to be bringing more in on digital advertising? I think is a question, because I think I might have heard this one in the past. So that's one thing that I would quite like. I don't know who would like to answer that.
I'm happy to pick that one up, because my other job is in procurement and commercial, and so the advertising sits with me operationally from an officer perspective. Yes, in terms of the further income that we anticipate bringing in, we've had a pipeline of agreed areas where we advertise, and we have secured very good arrangements for securing that income, and are on track to deliver that. We've had significant success this year in addition, so we can already see the profiling to deliver that.
Councillor Rowbottom.
Thank you very much, and always an excellent lens to apply to ongoing efficiency. I wanted to see what the council's stance, planning, kind of stage of processing generative AI and the opportunities that would unlock is at. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a full answer type. It'd be great to table that as an agenda for obvious reasons, in complement with all of these 4 priority areas and the work that you're doing for efficiencies.
So as an organisation, we have clear policies and procedures in place for looking at the ethical approaches and implications of this particular area of policy. And we have brought forward significant digital interventions which don't yet include generative AI, but we are exploring and understanding what that might look like for us in the future.
Councillor Brockbank-Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. Could you explain, please, how much of the legal services costs are spent on in-house lawyers, and how much is spent hiring additional lawyers?
So the budget you're looking at here, this is the internal legal department. So the expenditure budget was the staffing for our internal costs, and there's an income line associated with that. So we recharge that out to departments based on their demand. So departments themselves will also hold budget for external legal costs. I'll have to come back to you with the numbers for that because it's there's budgets held in children's, adults, etc. for that external legal cost. So all you've seen tonight is the internal costs. So we'll have to come back to you on the external.
Okay, thank you. I would like you to, please. Thank you.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I'd like to just go back to the household support fund we talked about. We talked about uncertainty and it being a huge risk. I note from the report that the household support fund was worth 2.8 million last year, and it's not going to continue beyond the 31st of March this year. That's 9 weeks away or something. That's a huge gap of funding for our most vulnerable residents, and we can pretty much guarantee that the cost of living crisis will continue beyond the 31st of March. Do you have an idea of when the government will announce if anything is replacing that, or have we had to make a contingency for what we're going to do in place of it completely?
So there's a budget on the 8th of March. The central government, Jeremy Hunt will be setting out proposals then. My understanding is that if anything is going to happen, that's when it would be allocated. So, I mean, we're very much waiting and watching that. That doesn't give us a great deal of time. That's less than a month before the 2.8 million pounds dries up. Right? So this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the chaotic way in which central government allocates funding towards local government. We're planning on the assumption that there isn't anything. Right. So we are reallocating money. We're looking at the services we're providing. There are a number of council-funded support schemes, so we're looking at those to see to what extent those can step in to fill the gap. But yeah, this is something that is taking up an awful lot of thinking at the moment.
Mr. Kelsey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to a question that Councillor Brockman Fowler asked about legal services. Our legal services are excellent and provide all the services that the council needs. The council only goes out on an external basis for advice if it's an exceptional case or it's a particular speciality that we haven't got in-house. It might be property related or something of that nature. Commercial deals can get very complicated, and sometimes it's best to get the best advice to protect the council's position overall. The spend that we have against external lawyers is a small amount compared to the overall expenditure of the council, but we'll provide the information to you. I just felt it important just to emphasise that point.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in the committee? Could I just ask a question about the fraud investigations? There was quite a high number. Have we got an assessment of how much that saves us, year on year? And is that number particularly gone up in the last year or so, or is it roughly the same kind of number that we investigate every year?
That's another one we'll have to come back to you on. I'm afraid I didn't get that information before then.
Okay, that was fine. Thank you.
So can I just quickly come back on that one? So I think this is something that gets reported to the audit committee. So there'll be information kicking about that we can provide. But yeah, fraud is something we take hugely seriously, right? And anyone who's taking money from the council who shouldn't be taking it should be cracked down on pretty quickly, and that's what we do. There's further scope for identifying even more fraud if it's out there through our work with the business intelligence team, and that's something that we're looking at doing more in the future, and hopefully clawing back even more money lost through fraud.
Thank you very much. Anybody else got any? Thank you for your presentations. We haven't drilled in quite as much on the service areas, but I think it's really important that we know that, that all of those things happen in the council, and that you're finding it increasingly difficult in a very fast changing world. So thank you very much for coming along and giving your presentation this evening. Thank you. We'll now take a sort of very, very brief break while we change officers and services. Okay, thank you, everybody. We now have the second main item on this evening's agenda, which is an update on the new voter identification rules. We had a report back, I believe, just before the summer on this item, and that was before the Electoral Commission had published their review of the elections that took place last May. We obviously have elections in London this May, and there are elections across the country, and it's probably not too long before we have a general election. So we were keen to look at this item again to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can in Hammersmith and Fulham to ensure that nobody who wants to be able to vote is excluded, and we want to encourage as many people in our borough to vote as possible. So on that note, I would like to hand over to Zoe Wilkins to give us an update and presentation on where we are in Hammersmith and Fulham in terms of preparing for May.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me back here this evening. Before you, I hope, is an update, as the Chair explains, about voter ID and how we're planning to bring it about in Hammersmith and Fulham. Since I last reported to you, as the Chair mentioned, both the Electoral Commission and DLUC, and that's Department for Housing, Levelling Up and Communities, I will refer to it as DLUC going forward because it's just too long. They've also published reports on the impact of voter ID on voting in the UK. As we anticipated, both of them have reported that some groups of electors found it more difficult to vote at polls than others, and that's because of the introduction of the new voter ID rules. Those groups included disabled voters, lower income and unemployed voters, voters from ethnic minorities, those living in social housing and younger voters. There are a couple of basic problems that voters may face when it comes to voter ID that have been identified. The first is a lack of awareness of what the new rules are. Secondly, it's knowing what the rules are, but not having acceptable, there is a list of acceptable photo ID, and not knowing where to get free voter ID to use in polling stations. We can provide free voter ID, which is touched on in the report. We have already carried out some activities to address these. We put a flyer in every household annual canvassing form in the autumn. We included information in the winter booklets. We have done some social media comms. And of course, we supported the GLA's Local Democracy Week campaigning. So we did quite a lot of work and reiterating of information at that point. We are now, of course, in the process of ramping up our activities and intensifying all of that because we do have an election now to hang it on. We know that voters tend to take more notice of the things that we send them when there is an election approaching. So obviously, as the Chair mentioned, we have the London Mayor and Assembly elections on the 2nd of May and a general election at some point this year. The Prime Minister indicated in the second half of the year, but of course, we don't know that for absolute certain. While the new rules affect all electors, and of course we will be using social media, internal comms, other advertising to increase general awareness, we've used the Electoral Commission's report in particular to consider which groups of voters we might need to target more specifically in the borough. And I don't want to repeat what's in the report in its entirety, but for example, we've been working with the Youth Council to produce some communications for young and future voters, short videos, hopefully a podcast and some advertising. We will be reusing our co-produced designs to provide information for our disabled voters and providing resources in accessible formats such as audio, easy read, plain text, braille to our partner organisations such as Action on Disability, the Citizen Advice Bureau, Age UK and so on. Similarly, we'll be providing resources for the Faith Forum to pass on to residents. I mean, in particular for Muslim women who may have concerns about unveiling in a polling station to show their face to be checked against their ID. It's important that they know there will be private areas where that can be done, and there are women working in every one of our polling stations. So we want to make people comfortable about what to expect and what we will be providing for them. Finally, we have been learning from some other authorities. As the last part of the report kind of expresses, and sets out, we are trying to learn from other places. For example, we picked up from Haringey, perhaps getting library staff involved with supporting residents to get voter authority certificates, which is the free ID. We will be picking up things like having table mats in polling stations so we can show voters what the acceptable voter ID is and keep staff aware. At the last meeting that we had, people were mentioning that some voters got turned away even though they had the right ID. Obviously, we want to avoid that. So things like simple visual documentation for staff is one way to go, and we will be doing that, obviously. We will continue to borrow and share messaging and ideas with other councils. I'm a member of the Association of Electoral Administrators. We have a London branch, it's very active, which I chair, and we are regularly meeting with other managers across London to share good experience, good learning, good ideas, and the rest of it. I will leave it there because I'm sure members will have questions for me. That sort of summarises where we're at the moment. There's a lot beginning now and beginning to intensify, but I'm very happy to take questions and suggestions and ideas. Thank you.
Councillor Brockbank Fowler.
Thank you very much for that update. It is incredibly important that as elected representatives, we feel that we can be elected by anyone in the population. My point was going to be, are you where you would hope to be, given that we all think that the first election we'll have this year will be on the 2nd of May? In a sense, it's a good practice run for the general election. Obviously, nationally, all advertising will be ramped up and there'll be an awful lot of it about. Have you thought whether you're going to put into the new council tax increase statement in April, because the timing of that is pretty perfect for the May election?
A quick answer, yes, we will be having a flyer in the council tax. Sorry, we will have a page in the council tax booklet. That is in design and in conversation with the comms team at the moment. So yes, there will certainly be something in there. How big, quite what format is under discussion. But yes, we will definitely have something in the council tax leaflet. As to, are we happy with where we are? We can always do more. And, you know, some conversations are, I would say, week, 2 weeks behind where I would like them to be, but that's elections in general. I'm always a week, 2 weeks behind where I would comfortably like to be. But, you know.
Somehow I doubt that, actually. I think you're just being too modest. But anyway, look, thank you for those answers.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on that, and then I'll bring one or two other members in. Councillor Brockbank Fowler said, you know, the government will ramp up the awareness campaign at a national level. Do we know what the shape of that ramping up at a national level might look like? I think that's question one. And it also goes back to the sort of funding element, the grant element that we were given locally, or have been given, or maybe are still to receive locally in terms of what else we can do. I'd be grateful for your comments on that, because I think we were quite interested in that at the last committee.
Yeah, sure. So the first question is actually the easy one. The national campaign, if you like, will be run through the Electoral Commission. They actually started their campaign on the 8th of January. So I have actually seen a couple of their adverts. And a member of staff has come up to me and said, oh, I didn't know about voter ID. I said, oh, good. Somebody has seen them. That's 2 of us that have seen it. But yes, they will be doing national advertising, TV, YouTube is where the one I saw. In addition to that, the GLA themselves are also going to be doing advertising. So it's not actually just national government, but the national campaign goes through the Electoral Commission. It is in fact, I think I have a version here from my own borough where I live. It's this post-it note campaign, which you may or not have seen. I don't know if that's of help to anybody, but I can send that around. So there is national branding, national funding, and this follows what they did last year in the authorities outside London who had polls. Of course, we did not. Funding, we've had about 19,747 for communications. We've in total though had from central government 47,683. Now none of that is ring fenced. However, the other items in that kind of that money are ticketed, if you like, for things like equipment in polling stations, accessibility, overseas electors, the additional costs to us in the expected increase in the numbers of those, and postal voting costs, because now that's an online application. So there are things that are ticketed. We don't expect to get any more money for comms per se, but if I can, you know, I have got a little bit of wriggle room, because if I'm not spending lots of money on screens for polling stations, for example, because we intend to repurpose our voting pods, then I have got a little bit extra that way that I can utilise. But we're not expecting any further money for comms. We are expecting one additional payment by grants. We are expecting to get a grant determination letter sometime in the next couple of weeks, but that again is very specifically for May's elections around poll cards and things like that. Does that answer the question?
I think Councillor Ree wants to come in on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm glad to hear that government are going to be ramping up publicity of this. They could hardly ramp it down much, could they? I mean, we supposedly had this ramping up of publicity ahead of the local elections that took place last year, and 14,000 people were denied a vote because of this this change in the rule. £20,000 of funding to tell people about this major change is pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. I'd love to think that everybody goes through the council tax booklet and reads every word, looks at every page. I think probably the reality is that maybe they're a bit busy for that, and so they're not looking at scrutinising every word. The government needs to do a heck of a lot more than give us less than 20 grand and do some YouTube adverts. This is a really important change. It's hugely detrimental to thousands of people. And it's, as we can see from this report, it's already had major catastrophic consequences.
Thank you, Councillor Ree. Councillor Daly. I've got everybody wanting to come in now, I think. Councillor Daly.
Thank you. Thanks for presenting that. The watchdog, the electoral watchdog, said back in June that 14,000 people, or at least 14,000 people, were stopped from voting in June. They talked about more being put off at the door, and they also talk about a significant amount of people who didn't actually leave their homes, were put off completely. Now, from the 2nd of May, I believe that there are also changes to the postal votes. Coming from a communications background, I know if you're trying to communicate anything, there's a big change, you need to do it one small step at a time. We're looking at a significant amount of communication about several different changes that are really fundamental, which we can just imagine anybody struggling with any language barriers, any physical barriers, any digital exclusion will really struggle with this. I suppose my question is, have we considered how we can encourage people to really push through and vote in this election? I'm guessing.
Yes, there's a couple of questions in there. So voter turnout, I guess, and how much we do about encouraging that as an elections team is quite tricky, because there's only so much that we can say and remain obviously completely impartial, and it wouldn't be for us to say, if you feel very strongly about X, Y, Z thing, then you should turn out or not turn out. And we tend to rely on yourselves as activists to be pushing that line. However, we do try to let as many people know, polling information. There is an election coming. We put it on all our social media. We put it on our advertising, on our electronic boards. We put stuff in libraries. Obviously, we send poll cards to everybody, all of that kind of thing. So we do try and encourage awareness and turn out in a very kind of impartial way. So yes, we do try and encourage everybody. You touched on postal voting and the changes to that. That's slightly out of the remit of this, but yes, there are changes to postal voting arrangements. People can now apply for a postal vote online. And they have to provide their national insurance number. If they can't provide that, it's some other form of ID before we can send them a postal vote. And there are rules around yourselves as activists actually being able to handle those postal votes. Basically, you're not allowed to anymore. But people, where I think we have a bit of work to do in informing postal voters in particular, is to let them know that if they are intending to drop off their poll card or their postal vote, either with us or in a polling station, they will need to stop and fill in a form telling us who they are. So there's some bits and pieces like that. There's overseas electors which is now voting for life. So that we used to have the last general election, I think it was about 3,000 overseas electors. We do expect that to double probably at the next general election. It's a guess, but that's what we're working to. So there is a lot of change, and there's a lot of change for people in polling stations and for voters themselves. And you're right that in London in particular, and in Hammersmith and Fulham, of course, we're not just implementing voter ID as they had the chance to do last year. We are also implementing these other changes, including for EU nationals as well. So after this May's polls, we will be writing to EU nationals who may not have settled status, or we don't know if they have settled status, and they will lose the right to vote. Some of those. So there's a lot coming down the line from the Elections Act. It's not all about voter ID. I'll be very happy to talk more about all of those things as well. But yes, it's hard. It's hard to get complex information over, and it's one line at a time. I think it's one thing at a time.
It seems like such a lot for residents to take in, and it's such a lot for anybody working at a polling station to take in. I mean, it seems like it's just a recipe for mistakes to happen.
Yeah, that's why training will be so important.
Councillor Rowbottom and then Councillor Perez, and then I'll come the other way.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting. There was a piece in the FT yesterday where John Pulling, who is the chair of the Electoral Commission, who is the independent, which is the independent government body overseeing national elections, has said that the new rules are, and I quote, very, very tight. And the photo ID requirement is clearly proving more of a barrier to some people than others. I'm going to quickly skip to Zoe's helpful summary of those others. Disabled people, people on lower incomes, ethnic minorities, people in social housing, and young voters. Well, I've done a fair bit of canvassing in my time, and that sounds a lot like Labour voters. So I've done a bit of maths, not my strongest suit, but the Electoral Reform Society has estimated that 2%, this is nationally, don't have any voter ID. That in Hammersmith and Fulham, a crude estimate, which is always underestimated on our population, would mean that 3,709 residents can't vote. I'm sure that, Zoe, I wondered if you had more tailored estimate. I'm sure it's almost impossible to identify, but I wonder if national, local Conservative representatives think it's acceptable that 3,709 residents in this borough couldn't vote if an election was called today.
So if you take the local electorate as being roughly at polling on a local election is probably about 130,000 people. So that's about 3,900. So it's slightly higher than your estimate. I mean, I won't answer the question that you asked the member, but sorry, what I was going to say, my thread completely. Yes, it's numbers of people who can't vote because they don't have voter ID. That's, I think, is one of the reasons why it's crucial that we get out to as many people as we can, through as much engagement as we can, how people can get free voter ID. Because if you don't have a driving licence, and people are less likely to have a driving licence perhaps in London than they might have elsewhere, it's important that you know how then to get voter ID that you can take down to your polling station, and that we enable as many of you to explain that to voters and all our frontline staff and libraries and others, because yeah, 3,900 people, that's a huge number of people, potentially.
It is. Thank you.
Councillor Ree.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I completely agree, Councillor Rowbottom. I mean, going back to the John Pullinger interview, he says Conservative ministers have opened themselves up to the charge that the rules have been brought in to benefit the Tory party. Right. This is a solution in search of a problem, as we discussed last time. There is no huge scale voter fraud going on. This has been brought in with the, it seems to me, with the express aim of disenfranchising certain groups. Certain groups who, as you say, are less likely to vote for the Conservative Party. It's a dreadful policy. It's stopping thousands of people from voting. 3,900 people in our own borough would be stopped from voting because of this policy. It's an outrage. It's an absolute outrage.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Perez.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at the activities that have already taken place. So I see the reference that you've also alluded to, the flyers that were sent to every household with the annual canvassing form. And letters alerting residents that voter ID would be required. However, the number of applications for voter authority certificates was not high. So my question is, are there lessons learned from what we've done at local level? So that in future communications, we try and get more people engaging. Also, what's the role of the voluntary sector here? Are we doing partnership work with them? Many, for example, I know ethnic community groups, so trust organizations that work at local level and may speak their community languages as well, who may be able as well to pass that message. There's also reference to the use of digital boards. Are we using traditional notice boards in our council states, for example, as well to raise awareness?
Thank you. Before you answer, can I just say I noticed sort of Haringey have been doing a campaign in the libraries, and I believe Hounslow have been reaching out to some of their community groups, and I'm just wondering what plans we might have like that, which actually supports the question that Councillor Perez just asked.
Yeah, so in terms of leaflets in the annual canvassing information, didn't work well, particularly, I would say. Oh, well, we say that, we don't really know. We hope that people have read it and are aware now that they have to take voter ID to the polling station. The difficulty with doing something in September when you don't have a poll until May is obvious. People will forget, but we hope that it's a starting trickle. And as I say, we aim to hang our publicity and efforts more this side of the year, because of course we have an election coming, so it should be current, we hope, in people's minds. But a small sort of slow drumbeat in the background regularly won't hurt. Did it result in lots of people going online and getting voter ID? No. And that's obviously a bit of a shame, but we continue. It's a start. In terms of local organisations, I've been working with the co-production team, for example, who are putting me in touch with the team at Action on Disability, who themselves then have residents who are trained up on co-production themselves, and hopefully will be able to be ambassadors for us, if you like, and talk to their friends, family, communities about the accessibility stuff we have around voter ID, and again about the free voter ID and what will happen in a polling station and all of that. We're working with the Faith Forum. Again, I mentioned it earlier, but the kind of, information about privacy in polling stations, and hoping therefore there's a bit of a gap generally, and the Commission touch on this on their reports. So, for example, with disabled people, it might be that yes, we've got all this lovely facilities in our polling stations, but that's only any good if a voter knows about it. So there is this gap, and we are trying, or I am trying to get into some of these community organisations. I am at the moment, though, at the stage of I've got resources, I've got stuff in various different formats, and I can email that out to people as a sort of a distribution list. But I need, I think, a bit more help with, and I've talked to Matt about this earlier, a bit more help with actually speaking to some individuals and having conversations with people, because I do feel that's where you get more buy-in and people being enthused and then thinking, oh, I know somebody who would actually really love to go and talk to a group of young people or whatever it might be to go out. And that's where the Youth Council have been good so far, because they've been quite enthused, and I was hoping actually we'd have something for you tonight, but we don't, where they're going to design it and they're speaking to each other. So there's a much better communication there than there is from some, slightly boring, sadly, older person from the electoral services team coming and having a chat about how important voting is. I mean, there's a gap there. So yes, we are doing work with through SOBUS, through libraries, I've started a conversation with the library management now about voter ID and specifically actually whether or not we can support them to support residents in applying for the free ID. But there is obviously there's some sort of mechanics involved in that. But at the very least, I expect to be able to brief the library team so that they can have conversations with voters coming in, put up leaflets, posters, that kind of stuff. You touched as well on, are we using traditional boards? The digital boards are actually in our lifts and things in our estates. So that's where they already are, or some of them already are on our housing estates. But yes, if we've got notice boards, then we can put posters up. That's fairly straightforward and standard for us to do that. We're doing targeted Facebook ads and stuff like that as well on the digital side for, yeah. So we've got quite a fairly robust communications plan now, but it's the engagement one-to-one stuff, which I find more difficult. Yeah.
I'll come back to you in a second. Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually in the last question, you may have answered quite a lot of one of my questions, which was how you're trying to, there was obviously the research, and we've got some now evidence of people who are being denied a vote due to these voter ID rules. And obviously the groups which are being, there are obviously some specific groups which are more heavily impacted than others. It sounds like you're actually doing some work that's targeting, in particular, disabled people and young people. I guess this sort of ethnic minority ethnic groups as well. It sounds like you're doing some stuff there, but interested to see, I suppose you've probably said what you can, but whether there's anything further you can do to specifically target those groups who've clearly been most obviously impacted by the evidence we've got. So that's one sort of set of questions. So it may just be a supplement to your earlier answer, and sorry, also thank you for the report. I thought it was very comprehensive, and it's good to see that you're taking on board the practice from the evidence and the experience of other boroughs in London that have undergone some of this so far. So interested to hear if you've got any more to say on that, and also how you might iterate that, presumably post the May elections when we'll have more evidence of how it's worked here. I suppose the second thing is really more around, obviously in some cases it's ensuring that everyone knows they need to have ID, and then the second point is the 3,900 people need to know that they actually need to do something mechanically to get the ID. And obviously there is this voter, this VAC that they can get. I mean, I wonder if you could just explain how many, if any, applications we've had to date for one of those, and what sort of the mechanism is for going about getting it, and how quickly people might be able to get it. Because presumably the other thing is, if say you or your colleagues are producing this certificate, that there's going to be some cost involved in doing that, and some you're not going to be able to turn it around in 24 hours necessarily. But interested to know how quickly you would be able to do that if that was a route that people were going down, which it may or may not be.
So I'll do the last one first, if that's okay. So VACs, voter authority certificates. The easiest way for people to get them is to go online. Now people can come through our website, or they can just go straight to the national portal. But if they wanted to do it through Hammersmith and Fulham, it would be lbhf.gov.uk/elections. And there's a link there that will take them to where they can get the certificate. It is actually fairly straightforward. The biggest problem that people have had with it is with photographs, because part of the application is uploading a photograph of yourself. We have had one or two people upload pictures of celebrities. They are not the celebrities. Some fairly, some bit of girding and a bit of dark lighting and stuff like that have sort of stylied one or two folks. We've only had 140 applications, so it's tiny, the number of people we've had. They are fairly quick for us to process. We have so few, but we can do it fairly quickly, and we turn it around. What actually happens is the application is hosted by the government portal .gov.uk. And then we log ourselves onto the portal, and we just go through, have they given their name, address, date of birth, national insurance number, and are they registered to vote? So if they are, and they've uploaded a reasonable photo of themselves, we just say, yep, thank you. And the voter can then either choose to come and collect their ID if they want to, or more commonly, it will just get posted to them. We don't actually touch it, we don't physically print it, with some very rare exceptions for people who are anonymously registered. because obviously that's, yeah, they come to us directly. And also if we were in an election situation and somebody had lost theirs, we can then also reissue it locally. We would print it locally, but we don't print it, we don't post it, we just process it. So yes, if we got lots and lots and lots of them, which is obviously 3,900 or 4,000 or whatever, because you don't have to not have ID to get a VAC. Anyone in this room is entitled to apply for a VAC. I mean, anybody can apply. If we got lots and lots, yes, there would be a staffing issue, I guess. But the experience so far, certainly outside London in the polls, has not been that there's been thousands and thousands, sadly. So, yep, the easiest way for voters to do it is online, or they can do it on paper. And in which case it's a question of either asking for a paper copy or downloading one, printing it off, filling it in, and then, you know, attaching a snap of themselves that's of the requisite kind of clarity. This is one of the problems with trying to do it in the libraries, is because the library staff won't be able to check if somebody is registered online and then sort that problem out, is registered to vote. And sort that problem out as we would be able to do in the office. But we do think they should be able to help them. So it is, in fairness, quite a straightforward process. It's just that people are unaware of it. The photo is the big thing though, because not everybody has one of these to take a photo of themselves. Not everybody has somebody who can take a photo of them. And we are quite happy to do that for people. We have done it for a few people, and we want ideally frontline staff other than us as well to be able to do that for folks. It's very simple. I'm very happy to actually teach all, you know, members as well, because you have such a lot of interaction with members of the public. It would be, you know, maybe a little handy guide for you all on how to do it. Quite if you find that useful, and likewise anything about voter ID, so that you can use it in your surgeries and things like that, because you're quite well placed actually to help people with it. Just to answer the question. And then your other question was around, is there anything else around particularly ethnic minority folks? I mean, you know, we have a kind of a list of community groups within the borough. So you have, I don't know, just trying to think off the top of my head, but of various organisations. My mind has now gone completely blank. But yes, they're on sort of mailing lists, as I said earlier. That's the trouble for me at the moment. But there are people within the council I know who are in actual contact with those. So I am working through some people that I know are in contact with them. So, for example, the Prevent team, the housing team, Matt's own team here, the Cost of Living Alliance, those kind of folks, so that they can tap into those things. So what I'm trying to do at the moment is find other people who can engage those people for me, because, yeah, I don't want to spread myself too thin, obviously. Yeah.
Councillor Treyi.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you for your brilliant reports. They've been great tonight. Thank you. My two things are pretty much answered as well, but I was going back to the digitally excluded and where they can go to get a paper copy that they fill in. And if they, you know, I actually had a resident just last week saying to me they don't even have a smartphone or a computer, and they're just in that age bracket, between 50 and 60, where they didn't seem to have the right ID to use. So I was a bit of a miss where to direct them. So that's my first question, is where do we direct them right now if they're digitally excluded? And then my other question was a broader one, which was about how to get the message out, communications and advertising. And from the earlier report, we found out that we earn quite a lot of money through digital advertising. So whether we can ask that department to extend screens and places to digital advertise, and then we could procure advertising spots on their digital screens. You know, just thinking about how we put those two things together. Thank you.
Okay, so digitally excluded, I mean, it depends how excluded, I guess, but if they have access to a telephone, phone electoral services helpline, 0208 753 4466, or you can obviously come and see us in Cobbs Hall. If people were to come here, we would recommend really that they phone up and make an appointment to do that, so that we can make sure we have a member of staff here to come and talk them through the process. But again, perhaps there's a bit of scope there for us, making sure we have some of the forms behind that very useful screen over there, which I haven't been in this room for quite some time, so that might I might be speaking to the FM team about whether or not they can help us with that. And we've already been having some conversations with them about what they may be able to do for us going through the election in terms of dealing with simple inquiries from the public. So yeah, talk to us is the quickest thing, and we will post one, absolutely no problem, and put them in libraries. Yeah.
So just on the digital advertising, yeah, quite happy to work with you, Zoe, to see what is possible and what isn't in terms of our digital advertising boards. And I know that that's not the only source of advertising in the borough, that those which we make income on, which we could also explore. So happy to pick up with you from the advertising board.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Daly.
Thank you. I have a bit of a hard question. Councillor Vaughan sort of asked part of my question earlier. An all-party parliamentary group at the end of last year talked about how polling parks have been shown to be more likely to compare photo ID to the person presenting it if they are of the same ethnicity. So they're recognising people of the same ethnicity, and they're more likely to reject it if it's of a different ethnicity. Now, here in Hammersmith and Fulham, we're going to be quite a testing bed for how that can work. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me what sort of data we're planning to capture on the other side of the election, if you like, and what we're going to do with that data, and what sort of learning, what we're going to do with the learnings.
Okay, so first things first. So in terms of what data we will capture, there is actually a standard electoral commission form which was used at the last set of local elections, which they have tweaked for this set of elections because it wasn't particularly well received by staff who were filling it in, and there were quite a lot of errors and things. But that will capture so there's two forms, in fact. There's one which we can't unseal, which if somebody gets turned away from a polling station who's turned up and they've presented ID and the polling station staff have said, no, that is not you, we don't think this is valid ID for you. That's one form, but we are not allowed to unseal that. Having said that, what's called a VIDF, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, that's where people have turned up and they've been turned away because they haven't got ID with them, and that's more likely where we would capture that, because we would just say, actually, we will try and capture it that way, but we have to be careful that this is people's personal data, and there is a thing about, we are saying, oh, Zoe Wilkins turned up at the polling station, it wasn't you, and then actually no, it wasn't me because it wasn't me, or no, it was me. Either way, there's a little bit of worry there about how we would capture that information, and that's difficult. That is a little bit difficult for us to do it. But so it will be sort of bar charts and tick sheets, I think. But what we will want to know is how many people turn up and get turned away because they don't have voter ID, and how many of those come back. So that's people who don't have it at all. But people who have presented it and then been refused a ballot paper because the voter ID does not appear to be of them, that's a formal form that they have to fill in and put into a sealed packet. I may ask POs to keep a bar chart of how many of those they have in their stations, because that would be the only way I would be able to pick that up outside of the formal list. I'll have to give that some more thought about how I would go about doing that. And then analysing it obviously was, well, how many do we have? Is there any information about, as you say, kind of ethnic background or gender or whatever else that it may be? I'm hoping that we will have very, very few people turned away that way, because I do think some of that is training, actually.
Yeah.
I do think that's a lot about how do we train our staff, and also the fact that our staff are actually fairly reflective of the makeup of this borough. We're not, it's not all white middle class men with beards or whatever. We have quite a wide variety of staff working in our stations, which is the key thing.
I was thinking about that, but we also have a really wide ethnic diversity, and it's not just white to any other ethnicity, it's between there's not enough spaces in a polling station to have it be completely representative.
I think our line with our staff, and I don't think I'm going to be different from anywhere else in London on this, is I think our line to our staff is, if you are turning someone away who has presented you with ID, you have to be sure that is not their ID. not the other way round, that you have to be sure that it is there. I think that's the emphasis has to be, you know, that's good enough, particularly because when people are presenting ID, it doesn't have to be current ID either. It just has to be a good enough resemblance. So I think that has to be, if it's good enough, yeah, I'm fairly certain that's, you know, I think that's all.
I know Councillor Reid comes in. Before he does, I was just going to ask, in terms of turnout at elections, so the general election, the turnout is likely to be greater than in any other election that we've had under this system so far,
sure.
And indeed greater than it is likely to be in May in London. So I suppose my question is really about the anticipation of those additional resources we may need in the polling stations in terms of understanding staff, you know, in terms of having women there to be able to assist voters, etc. I'm just wondering, can we have any measure of what we might anticipate the additional needs being, given in the general election the turnout could be higher than as experienced so far under this new system?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it will be higher. The general election, I mean, unless something extraordinary happens in the mayoral election, yeah, turnout will be high for a general election. I guess we already have, and the government anticipated this already in funding that they're doing for April for the polls, is we are being given funding for an additional clerk in every station. I don't anticipate putting an additional clerk in every single station because some of our stations are quite small and it just wouldn't be worth it. But perhaps putting two in a bigger station. What I intend to do, I think, after May is to have a look at how many people we did turn away at every polling station, get feedback from all our presiding officers, get feedback from yourselves and other activists about, you know, were there particular stations where we felt there was queuing, or we felt there were, you know, lots of delay, if you like, because of information about voter ID. So yes, post May polls, we will look again at staffing levels in particular that we will need in polling stations. There are other resources as well that we might need, we will need in the electoral services core team. As I touched on earlier, overseas electors, for example, that's now voting for life. We've had 140 of those in the last 7 days. So we've had as many of those in the last 7 days as we've had voter authority certificate applications. We're expecting, at the moment, we've got about 1,000 registered. Last general election, there were 3,000 registered, so if you double that, and they're all taking a long time to process. Because that's quite complex applications. So we will need further resource in our polling stations and in our core team. I am doing a sort of preemptive right to DLUC to suggest that they give us extra funding for additional staff for a general election, because what they've given us, I don't think will actually cover the hours that we may need to do. In the informal conversation I've had with them, if we do a JLB, justification-led bid, it is likely that we will get refunded for that because they see that as part of new burdens funding. But we do need to be clear on our maths. So that's something I won't have a really good grip of until after May.
Still a lot of open-endedness by the sound of it. Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just as a sort of general point, yeah, I think this is a really troubling report to read. Yeah. Go back to what Councillor Daly said, you know, even with all of these caveats, 14,000 people were turned away from voting, people who wanted to have their say about how their community is run, people who wanted to have their voice heard. We know how hard it is as politicians to actually get people to turn out to vote. These are 14,000 people who went out to try and cast their vote and were denied because of this policy. Not to mention all the people who didn't turn up in the first place, as you said. I think the report shows that there's an awful lot of work going on trying to address this. You know, Zoe and Coyote are the best in the business, right? They're doing brilliant work, and you know, we'd expect nothing less from officers of this caliber, right? But they're doing all this work with their hands tied behind their backs. The fact that we've had less than £20,000 in order to communicate this, you know, huge change. The fact that the national publicity has been so dire, yeah, it sort of gives the impression that actually the government don't necessarily want people to know about this change. And going back to what Councillor Rowbottom said about John Pullinger's recent interview, you know, it seems as though it very much looks like this is the change that's been brought in to deliberately disenfranchise a group of people to the benefit of the Conservative Party. Yeah, all of this work- those aren't my words. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of John Pullinger, the chief, the chair of the electoral commission.
Can we?
So, those aren't my words. Those are the words of the.
We could.
I'm happy to speak without being, if I can do it
we
without
can
being interrupted.
Finish your conclusion.
Yeah,
That would be helpful, Councillor Ree.
Yeah. These aren't my words. These are the words of John Pullinger, the chair of the electoral commission. Now, all this work that is being done isn't being done in response to some sort of natural disaster. It's being done in response to a conscious decision that has been taken by central government. We've heard about the hoops that people have to jump through in order to get one of these voter authority certificates. Somebody without a smartphone who has to call up the council to make an appointment so that they can come in to have their photograph taken. This is just so that these people can vote. These aren't people who've done something wrong. These are people who want to have a say in how their community is run. And the fact that they're being made to jump through all of these hoops is frankly disgraceful. I think this report shows that there's an awful lot of work being done in this area, but I think it shows the real holes in the national policy. I think that 14,000 people being turned away in a set of local elections in a small part of the country is, I'm afraid, the tip of the iceberg, I think, when we come to the general election, unless there is a real step change in the government's attitude to this, it's going to be even worse.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing on this and all of the work you've done so far to try and make sure that, we don't disenfranchise anybody in Hammersmith and Fulham. There was a couple of points that I think it'd be useful to take away. I think you did mention the idea of informing members in terms of, how we can support people and having maybe a little leaflet or something of that nature that will help us to support people when we come across them. There was discussion about how you reach out to community groups. I think there's a lot of officers in the council that have connections with those community groups. And I would say that that is most definitely the sort of next step. You mentioned the Cost of Living Alliance. There's all sorts of residents groups that work with the council on co-production of various issues. So I think to reach into them would be really useful. And an idea that came to me as I was sitting listening to it, which I've actually seen in relation to if you want to register to vote now, or if you want to register for a postal vote, you can have a card with a little barcode on it. I'm just wondering if something to get the VAC forms, if that might be worth consideration, might be something that we could do in this borough. So it's just ideas that I hope have come out from the conversation that might just help what we can do here in Hammersmith and Fulham. And I think, we'll be very interested to see how it does go on the 2nd of May. And if at an appropriate point, perhaps you can come back and let us know. So thank you so much for coming along this evening and giving us that update. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that just leads me to the final item on the agenda, which is the work programme, which is on page, don't know what page it's on because I'm looking. 76. Is the work programme noted? Noted. Yeah, anybody wants to add anything suggestions wise or otherwise? Councillor Rowbottom.
Thank you. It just would be really interesting to pick up in sensible due course the generative AI subject, just because it is so implicitly cross-cutting. It's appropriate for this board, I feel.
Absolutely. And after discussion with officers, we're hoping that will be a priority for the next meeting. So thank you for that. Just on that, could everybody please note that the next meeting is on the 29th of April. I think that the meetings after that are in the council agenda, which we'll be looking at tomorrow evening. And until they are in that council agenda, we can't all confirm that that's when they're all going to happen. So we'll be endorsing those tomorrow evening. On that, can I ask if there's any other business, Councillor Daly?
Can I just ask you to confirm that the intention is to have those meetings here?
Officers, could I ask Mr. Abbott or KOD, could you comment on whether the forthcoming policy and overboard meetings will be here?
The corporate plan is for all our meetings to be held here, except for full council. So from now on, this is going to be our home until we move to the civic campus.
Thank you for that confirmation. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good journey home. Thank you.